Hello and welcome to this episode of Modern Academy. Sorry for the wait, but I really wanted to finish my level main so I could provide some examples from it. This episode is probably the most important one, so be sure to listen carefully. Color is probably the easiest thing to change, but the hardest thing to be original in. I will show you a couple of techniques that will help you get the colors just right when building modern, but ultimately you have to practice for yourself. Opacity and blending are two completely different things. In short, when you stack objects with a blending color, they form something brighter, whereas if you stack objects with low opacity, they form something darker, as seen on the example. For modern creators, blending isn't very important since it isn't used a lot. Opacity is more frequently used, but it's still limited. Generally speaking, modern designs contain solid blocks with solid colors. There are some occasions where blending and opacity are used though. In the first part of a fix, I used low opacity to make overlapping blocks that are see-through, and the chargeless effect is based off of blending, but otherwise modern creators rarely use it. To work properly with color, it's important to know how the color wheel works and what HSV is. The color wheel consists of three components: H as hue, S as saturation, and V as brightness. Anyway, the hue is the band that goes around the wheel, and it essentially controls what hue you choose, like green, red, or blue. The second component is the saturation. Saturation means the intensity of the color. A very saturated blue contains almost only blue, whereas a very desaturated blue is more of a blue mixed with gray, if that makes sense. On the color wheel, the saturation is displayed horizontally. Last but not least, the brightness. The level of brightness controls how dark or bright a color is, and it's displayed vertically on the wheel. When working with the HSV tool, you're essentially moving the color picker around the wheel. Now I'll show you a couple of different approaches of color, how to make them, and why they're good/bad. Rainbow. Rainbow is often used by new modern creators since it's an easy way of making something look colorful and nice. Be careful though, you should only use rainbow along with gray. And when working with rainbow, you should not make big objects only one color. Use all the colors all the time. This example is from Shading by Scott, and it shows just this, as Scott uses some small circles with different colors. You should also keep in mind that the rainbow colors make the orbs and portals stand out less, and those should therefore be easier to recognize. Scott is a master of rainbow style, and you should definitely go check him out, links in description. Keep in mind that the rainbow color should be quite desaturated, this will make it look better. Gray is often also used by new modern creators. It is better for the orbs, but it's quite boring. My tip is to never use this. Instead, do something like the next example. Single color. This technique is what should be done instead of gray. It's almost always better to choose a single color instead of all gray in my opinion. I really like this approach because you can make the single color any hue you like, and it will still look good. This technique often looks good paired with white details. You can see this color scheme used by Motley Orc in many of his newest levels. So if you're into this color scheme, you should definitely go check him out. Links in the description. The only issue I have with this approach is that it sometimes lacks a bit of contrast. And therefore you can also consider using dual colors. This is one of the harder color schemes. Getting two matching colors is not so easy, but if you do it right, it looks amazing. In my opinion, this is probably the best color scheme. The trick is to keep everything one color like the single color technique, but then to also add some contrast in a different color called the accent color. Another advantage of this color scheme is that you can add white to give another kind of contrast. Polycolor. This is not a color scheme I've used much, so I'm not going to talk about how to make it, but I'm just having it here to let you know that it exists. This is different from rainbow, since it doesn't use each color equally much. Now I'll show you an easy approach to making good modern color. First step is to pick a color in the middle of the wheel. This assures that the color has the right amount of saturation, and therefore you don't have to change this. Secondly, you should use the different levels of brightness to make other colors. I will show an example in the next slide. You now have a very simple single color setup. Here's an example of how you can make this work. The background is the middle color that we choose from before. The ground is 1.4 times this brightness. The blocks are 1.2. The spikes are 0.9, and some of the details are 2.0. You can easily make these levels of brightness by choosing a new color and make it copy the original color. Here's a screenshot from main, where I used exactly this approach. I choose one color around the middle of the wheel for the background and ground, and then I used 1.3 for blocks, 2.0 for details, and 0.96 for the spikes. Main is a little more complicated than this though, since it uses dual colors. But dual colors are actually easier to make than you might think. If you just use this simple guide, you'll always end up making good dual colors. The main color, which is the color of the background, ground, and some of the blocks, should be red, pink, purple, or any color in this orange area. It should be picked from the middle of the wheel once again. This should then be matched with an accent color that is light blue, turquoise, green, yellow, or orange. And this color should be picked from the top of the wheel as shown in the picture. If you make sure to follow this, you have a simple and good looking color scheme. Here are some examples of good color combos. Pause if you want to have a closer look. I used most of these in main as well. If you want to check out how I made the colors in some of my other levels, you can always do so by copying them and having a look for yourself. The passwords are right here on YouTube. In my part, I choose more of a rainbow theme. This is because the blocks I use have many different squares, and this suits rainbow. But this is totally changeable. For example, I could have gone for a dual color scheme instead, like red and orange, or deep blue and turquoise. This just goes to show that you can use different color schemes for the same part, and that there are no correct or perfect colors. It's just up to you to choose what you like. So just to sum up this episode, never use blending unless you're making the Charters effect. Use less gray and black, but use more color instead. Use a single or dual color scheme. Pick a color from the middle and use different levels of brightness for blocks and deco. Pick an accent color from the top if you're making dual colors. Practice and ask for advice. That was a long episode. I'm glad you stayed this far and maybe got some useful advice. I'll see you in the next episode where I'll talk about air deco. Bye.